They say it's just a story until something knocks back. Before you fall asleep, like and subscribe, because tonight's tale might follow you into your dreams. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? That matters more than you think, especially when the story gets close. Have you ever worked a night shift in a hospital? If you haven't, let me tell you, there's something about a medical facility after dark that feels fundamentally wrong. The long corridors with their squeaking linoleum floors, the fluorescent lights that never quite banish the shadows, the hollow echo of footsteps that always sound like they're coming from just around the corner. I wonder, as the rain patters against your window tonight, if you're listening to this alone. I hope not, because the story I'm about to tell you, what happened to me during my final night shift at St. Catherine's Hospital, is not one I'd recommend experiencing in solitude. I've been working as a nurse at St. Catherine's for nearly 7 years. It's an old Victorian building on the outskirts of Manchester, the kind that's been extended and modernized in patches over the decades, creating a labyrinthine complex of old and new wings connected by a bewildering network of corridors. Most of the staff hated night shifts there. The place felt too big, too empty after visiting hours ended. But I'd always preferred nights. The quiet suited me. Just the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes, the soft beeping of monitors, the rustle of paperwork. No administrators hovering about. No families demanding updates every 15 minutes. Just me and my patients, and the long, peaceful hours until dawn. That changed after what happened on the East Wing. The East Wing was the oldest part of the hospital, originally built in 1879. It had been scheduled for renovation for years, but budget constraints kept pushing the project back. The wing housed our long-term care facility, mostly elderly patients with chronic conditions, dementia cases, and a few persistent vegetative state patients with families unwilling to give up hope. I wasn't regularly assigned to East Wing. My usual post was in A&E. But that night, my last night as it turned out, we were short-staffed as usual. Janice, who normally covered East Wing nights, had called in sick with a stomach bug that had been making its way through the staff. I was asked to cover for her. It's a quiet ward tonight, Sharon, the ward administrator, assured me as she handed over the patient files. Only 7 patients, all stable. Mr. Harrison in room 4 sometimes gets confused at night, but a general reminder where he is usually settles him. I nodded, scanning the patient list. It seemed straightforward enough. Most were sleeping through the night with medication. Regular checks, medication administration at designated times, and documentation. A relatively easy shift. One more thing, Sharon added, almost as an afterthought. Room 8 is off limits. There was a plumbing leak, and the floor is still not safe. Maintenance has it locked. But just so you know, I thanked her for the information and settled in at the nurse's station. East Wing had a different atmosphere than the rest of the hospital. The high ceilings and large windows were remnants of Victorian medical thinking. That fresh air and light were crucial to healing. But at night, with rain lashing against those tall windows and wind moaning through the old stonework, it felt less like a place of healing and more like something from a Gothic novel. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I made my rounds, checking on sleeping patients, administering 10 p.m. medications. Mr. Harrison was indeed confused, asking me repeatedly where his wife was. I gently reminded him that she had passed away some years ago, and he would nod sadly before forgetting and asking again 20 minutes later. It was around midnight when I first noticed something odd. I was at the nurse's station, updating charts, when the lights flickered briefly, just a momentary dimming, then back to full brightness. Given the storm outside, it wasn't surprising. Old buildings, old wiring. I thought nothing of it. 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the lights stayed dim for nearly 30 seconds before brightening again. I glanced at the emergency lights, making sure they were operational in case of a full outage. All seemed in order. I returned to my paperwork, but found myself increasingly distracted. There was a new sound underneath the drumming of the rain, a faint, rhythmic dripping coming from somewhere down the corridor, likely the plumbing issue Sharon had mentioned in Roommate. I tried to ignore it, but the sound seemed to grow louder, more insistent. Drip, drip, drip. Perfect timing, like a metronome or a heartbeat. Eventually, I decided to investigate, if only to satisfy my curiosity. I couldn't very well call maintenance at midnight for a dripping pipe, but I could at least assess the situation from my end-of-shift report. The corridor stretched before me, seeming longer and darker than it had during my rounds. The overhead lights cast pools of harsh white illumination with distinct shadows between them. The dripping grew louder as I approached Roommate. The door was indeed locked, as Sharon had said. The yellow maintenance sign warning of the wet floor inside. But the dripping wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from further down the corridor, past the patient rooms, where it curved toward an emergency exit. I followed the sound, my rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum. The dripping led me to a door I hadn't noticed before, a small, unmarked door set into the wall just before the emergency exit. It was slightly ajar, revealing darkness beyond. Common sense told me to leave it alone, to go back to the nurse's station and finish my paperwork. But curiosity has always been my weakness. I pushed the door open wider, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. This was odd. I'd been given a tour of the facilities when I started at St. Catherine's, and I didn't recall any basement access in the East Wing. The main building had a basement, certainly, where they kept old records and equipment. But I thought the East Wing was built directly on a foundation without a lower level. I felt along the wall inside the door and found a light switch. I flipped it, but nothing happened. The dripping sound continued, echoing up from the darkness below. I took out my phone and switched on its torch function, directing the beam down the stairs. The light revealed concrete steps, discolored with age and what looked like water damage. The walls were bare stone, glistening with moisture. The dripping echoed more loudly now, its rhythm almost hypnotic. I should have turned back then, should have closed the door, reported the unexplained staircase to facilities management, and gone about my duties. But something compelled me forward, a kind of detached professional curiosity, perhaps, or something more primal that I couldn't name. I descended slowly, one hand on the damp wall for balance. The temperature dropped noticeably with each step, until I could see my breath fogging in the beam of my torch. The stairs curved around a corner, and the dripping grew louder, more insistent. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a narrow corridor with a low ceiling. My torch beam revealed more bare stone walls and a floor made of ancient-looking flagstones. Water pooled in the uneven depressions between them. The air smelled of damp and something else, a medicinal scent that wasn't quite antiseptic, something older, more primitive. The corridor stretched ahead into darkness, the dripping sound now clearly coming from somewhere at its end. I moved forward cautiously, my light barely penetrating the gloom. I'd gone perhaps 20 paces when I noticed the walls were changing. The bare stone gave way to tiles, old Victorian ceramic tiles in a dingy institutional green. And there were things mounted on the walls now, ancient medical equipment, a rusted metal contraption that might have been a primitive traction device. what looked like leather restraints fixed to the wall. This must have been part of the original hospital. I realized perhaps an early treatment room, sealed off and forgotten during renovations. But why the active leak? And why did the air feel so unnaturally cold? The corridor widened into what was clearly once a ward of some kind. My torch revealed a row of iron-frame beds along one wall. Their mattresses long rotted away to nothing but springs and stained ticking. Ancient equipment stood between them, proposed primitive monitoring devices, things whose purpose I couldn't even guess at. And at the far end of the room, something moved. I froze, my light fixed on the spot where I'd seen the movement. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a figure rose from beside the furthest bed, tall and thin, dressed in what appeared to be a doctor's white coat, darkly stained along its length. My first irrational thought was that I'd stumbled upon a colleague who'd somehow accessed this forgotten place. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin and strained in the cold air. "I'm sorry, I was just investigating a leak." The figure didn't respond. It simply turned toward me with a dreadful, deliberate slowness. In the beam of my torch, I could see that what I'd taken for a doctor's coat was in fact an old-fashioned surgical gown, the kind worn in the Victorian era, and the dark stain spattering it with the unmistakable rusty brown of dried blood. The figure's face was in shadow, but I could make out enough to see it was wrong. Too long, too thin, the proportions subtly but unmistakably inhuman. It raised one hand, and I saw it held something that gleamed dully in my torchlight, a scalpel, its blade darkened with the same substance that stained the gown. A rational explanation presented itself. Someone had gained access to the hospital, found this hidden area, and was engaging in some kind of disturbed role play, or worse. I needed to get out, to call security. I began backing away slowly. "I'm leaving now," I said, try and keep my voice steady. "There's no need for..." The figure moved. Not a step, not a walk, but a kind of jerking glide that covered the distance between us with unnatural speed. It stopped mere feet away, and now I could see its face clearly in the beam of my torch. Or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been was just smooth, pale skin stretched taut over a skull-like structure, with two deep, empty depressions where eyes should be, and a small, puckered hole in place of mouth. I turned and ran, dropping my phone in panic. The darkness swallowed me as I sprinted back along the corridor, hands outstretched to avoid collisions. Behind me came a sound, not footsteps, but a wet, dragging noise, punctuated by that same rhythmic dripping. I found the stairs through blind luck and scrambled up them, gasping for breath, not daring to look back. The door at the top seemed to have closed further, now just a narrow gap. I squeezed through it and slammed it shut behind me, then stood trembling in the hospital corridor, lungs burning, heart pounding against my ribs. Had I imagined it? A hallucination brought on by stress, poor lighting, and an overactive imagination? But the dampness on my hands from the walls was real enough. And the smell, that strange medicinal smell, clung to my uniform. I forced myself to calm down, to breathe deeply. There would be a rational explanation. An unauthorized person in the hospital. An elaborate prank by board night staff. Or simply my exhausted mind playing tricks. I checked my watch and was startled to see it was nearly 2 a.m. I'd been gone from the nurse's station for over an hour, though it had felt like minutes. I needed to get back to check on my patients. As I turned to head back to the ward, I noticed something on the floor by my feet, a small puddle of water. No, not water. It was too viscous, too dark. As I watched, a fresh droplet joined it, falling from somewhere above me. Drip. I looked up. The ceiling tiles directly overhead were stained with a spreading darkness. As I stared, another droplet formed and fell. Drip. I stepped back, only to feel wetness beneath my foot. Looking down, I saw more dark puddles forming along the corridor, leading in the direction of the patient rooms. The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the corridor into near total darkness before reluctantly returning to full brightness. In that brief moment of darkness, I thought I saw something move at the far end of the corridor. A tall, thin silhouette hovering outside one of the patient rooms. My training asserted itself through the fear. Whatever I'd seen, whatever was happening, my responsibility was to my patients. I hurried back toward the nurse's station, trying to convince myself that the strange spreading dampness was indeed just a plumbing leak, that the movement I'd seen was a fellow staff member checking on patients. The ward was silent when I returned, save for the beeping of monitors and the ever-present drumming of rain against the windows. I did a quick round, checking each patient. All were asleep, apparently undisturbed. All except Mr. Harrison in room 4. His bed was empty. Mr. Harrison? I called softly, checking the en-suite bathroom. Empty. He must have wandered off. Confused again. This happened occasionally with dementia patients. I returned to corridor, calling his name softly so as not to disturb the other patients. No response. I checked the day room, the small kitchen area, even the supply closets. No sign of him. It was as I was returning to the nurse's station to call security that I noticed room 8 again. The supposedly flood-damaged room that maintenance had locked. The door was now standing open. I approached cautiously, my earlier fear returning in a cold wave. The maintenance sign was still there, but the door was definitely ajar, darkness visible through the gap. Mr. Harrison? I called, pushing the door wider. Are you in here? The room beyond was in darkness. I reached for the light switch just inside the door, but like the stairwell, flipping it produced no result. I hesitated, then stepped inside, using the dim light from the corridor to navigate. Room 8 appeared to be a standard patient room, but devoid of furniture. No bed, no cabinets, no chair for visitors. Just an empty space with a window overlooking the grounds. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets, occasional lightning illuminating the room in brief, stark flashes. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd about the floor. It wasn't wet, as the maintenance sign had suggested. It was perfectly dry, and in the center of the room, barely visible in the gloom, was what appeared to be a trapdoor. My blood ran cold. A trapdoor, leading where? Down to that hidden basement level I discovered, but that made no sense. The stairwell entrance had been at the other end of the corridor. As I stood frozen in indecision, lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, I saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. Mr. Harrison, his back to me, facing the wall. Mr. Harrison. I said, relief washing over me. You shouldn't be in here. Let me take you back to your room. He didn't respond or turn around. I crossed the room and gently touched his shoulder. Mr. Harrison? He turned then, with that same dreadful, deliberate slowness I'd seen before. But it wasn't Mr. Harrison's face that looked back at me. It was that same smooth, featureless visage I'd seen in the basement, but now wearing my elderly patient's hospital gown. I stumbled backward. A scream lodged in my throat. The figure reached for me with pale, elongated fingers. Behind it, I saw the trapdoor in the floor begin to open, darkness spilling out like a physical substance. I fled, slamming the door behind me and running for the nurse's station. I had to call security, had to get help. None of this made sense. But my patients were in danger. I was in danger. The phone at the nurse's station was dead. Not even a dial tone. My mobile showed no signal. I was considering triggering the fire alarm to summon help when I heard it. That now familiar sound. Drip, drip, drip. Dark stains were spreading across the ceiling tiles above the nurse's station now. Droplets falling onto the countertop with metronome precision. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and in the darkness, I heard movement from the patient rooms. Doors opening, the shuffle of feet. Soft, with sound that weren't quite footsteps. When the lights came back on, they were dimmer than before, and I wasn't alone at the nurse's station anymore. They stood in a loose semicircle around me, figures in hospital gowns that I recognized as my patients. But their faces were all the same smooth, featureless expanse, with those empty-eye depressions and small, puckered mouths. And behind them, taller than the rest, stood the figure in the blood-stained surgical gown, scalpel still clutched in one elongated hand. I backed away until I hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. The figures advanced slowly, moving with that same jerky glide, closing the circle around me. The one in the surgical gown raised a scalpel, and that small, puckered mouth opened wider than should have been physically possible, revealing row upon row of needle-like teeth descending into darkness. A voice emerged, not from that impossible mouth, but seemingly from inside my own head, dry, ancient, like the rustling of old parchment. The night shift never ends, nurse. Not for those of us who remained when they sealed the ward. Not for those who died under my care. And now, not for you. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember collapsing. I only remember darkness closing over me like water, and that rhythmic dripping growing louder until it was all I could hear. I woke in A&E, my colleagues hovering over me with concerned faces. They'd found me unconscious on the floor of the East Wing nurses' station when the day's shift arrived. According to them, I'd been alone, all the patients safely in their beds, including Mr. Harrison. No sign of blood stains, no mysterious figures, no open trapdoor and roommate. There was a rational explanation, of course. I'd been working too many night shifts. I'd fallen asleep at the desk and had an extremely vivid nightmare. Or perhaps I'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination or fugue state. I nodded along with these explanations, thanked them for their concern, and submitted my resignation that same day. But here's the thing about the East Wing of St. Catherine's Hospital. In the weeks that followed my final shift, all 7 patients I'd been caring for died. Natural causes, according to their death certificates. Expected outcomes, given their advanced conditions. All 7 within a month, all during the night shift. And the new night nurse who took over my position, she reports hearing a dripping sound on rainy nights. Says the lights flicker sometimes. Says she found a door she'd never noticed before, just past the emergency exit. She hasn't opened it yet, but I know she will. Curiosity is a powerful force. So the next time you find yourself in a hospital after dark, and you hear that rhythmic dripping sound beneath the rain, remember my story. Because not all hospital wings are built for healing. Some are designed for other purposes. And in some, the night shift never truly ends. Are you still listening in the dark? Is that just rain you hear tapping at your window? Or is something else keeping time with the storm? Counting the seconds until your own private darkness falls? I'd turn on the lights if I were you. Quickly now. Drip, drip, drip. Have you ever been woken in the middle of the night by an unexpected sound? That moment of disorientation when you're not quite sure if what you heard was real or part of a dream. The way your heart seems to pause before beginning to race as you strain to hear if the sound will come again. I wonder if you're listening to this alone in your home, perhaps with the rain pattering against your windows, creating that cozy atmosphere of being safely sheltered while the elements rage outside. It's a comforting feeling, isn't it? The knowledge that you're secure behind locked doors, separated from the darkness and whatever might lurk within it. I used to find comfort in that feeling too, until the night of the midnight knock. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was living alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of a village in Northumberland. It was one of those quaint stone buildings with thick walls and small windows, set back from a rarely used country lane, and surrounded by open fields. My nearest neighbor was half a mile away, which suited me perfectly. I'd moved there after my divorce, seeking solitude and a quiet place to finish writing my novel. The cottage had been everything I'd hoped for, peaceful, remote, and with a certain rustic charm that made even inevitable quirks on old buildings seem endearing rather than annoying. The temperamental plumbing, the occasional draft, the way the wooden floors creaked and settled at night, all part of its character, I told myself. I'd been living there for about 4 months when it happened. It was late October, and autumn had firmly established itself across the countryside. The days were growing shorter, the nights longer and colder. A particular storm had been building all day, the clouds growing increasingly dark and heavy until they finally burst just after sunset, unleashing a deluge that drummed against the roof and windows with impressive force. I found the sound soothing as I worked on my manuscript in a small study I'd set up in what had once been a second bedroom. The rain provided a pleasant white noise, occasionally punctuated by rumbles of thunder that were distant enough not to be distracting. By midnight, I was exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress. I saved my work, shut down my computer, and went through my usual routine of checking the doors and windows before heading to bed. The cottage had only one floor, with a bedroom at the back overlooking a small garden that quickly gave way to open fields. The front door and the kitchen door at the rear were both securely locked, as were all the windows. Reassured by this ritual, I finally climbed into bed around 12:30. I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the steady drumming of rain against the bedroom window and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I'm not sure exactly how long I slept before the sound woke me. Knock, knock, knock. 3 precise, measured knocks on what sounded like the front door. Not particularly loud, but clear and deliberate. I sat up in bed, instantly alert, heart beginning to pound. I glanced at the bedside clock, 3:17 a.m. Who would be at my door at this hour? I lived too far from the village for it to be a neighbor in some kind of emergency. The lane outside wasn't on the way to anywhere. You only came down it if you were specifically visiting my cottage. I held my breath, listening. Had I dreamed it? The rain continued its steady patter against the window, slightly lighter now than it had been earlier. I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the knocking when it came again. Knock, knock, knock. The same measured pace, the same deliberate force. Someone was definitely at my front door. I slipped out of bed and fumbled for my dressing gown, trying to think rationally. Perhaps a motorist had broken down on the nearby road and was seeking help. Or maybe someone had got lost in the storm. But even as these reasonable explanations formed in my mind, a sense of unease grew stronger. Something felt wrong about those knocks. Too measured, too precise, as if whoever was making them was not in any particular hurry. I crept into the sitting room, which gave me a view of the front door. The cottage had no hallway. The door opened directly into the living space. A small table lamp provided the only illumination, casting long shadows across the room. Through the small window beside the door, I could see nothing but darkness and the distorted streaks of raindrops. "Who's there?" I called, my voice sounding thin and strained even to my own ears. No response, just the patter of rain and the occasional creak of the cottage settling around me. I moved closer to the door, but stopped short of actually approaching the peephole. An irrational fear had taken hold, a childish certainty that if I looked out, something would be looking back in. "Hello." I tried again, louder this time. "Can I help you?" Silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. And then, knock, knock, knock. Not urgent or impatient. The exact same rhythm and force as before, as if my speaking hadn't been heard, or was being deliberately ignored. I considered my options. I could open the door, but the thought of what might be waiting on the other side sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the late October air. I could ignore it and go back to bed. But would I be able to sleep knowing someone was out there? Or I could call for help. But who? The nearest police station was in the next town, a good 20 minutes drive away. Before I could decide, a new sound joined the knocking, a soft scraping against the door, as if someone was dragging fingernails across the wood. My mouth went dry. That wasn't the behavior of a stranded motorist or lost traveler. That was something else. I backed away from the door, moving as quietly as I could, and retrieved my mobile phone from where it was charging in the kitchen. No signal. The storm must have affected the reception, which was patchy at the best of times this far from the village. The landline then. I picked up the receiver, but instead of dial tone, all I heard was a strange, wet, bubbling sound, like someone breathing underwater. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. Knock, knock, knock. This time from the kitchen door at the rear of the cottage. My heart nearly stopped. Whatever was outside had moved. I hadn't heard footsteps on the gravel path that ran around the perimeter of the cottage. Hadn't heard any sound of movement at all. Yet somehow, they were now at the back door. I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the door with its small pane of glass that I leveled. The glass was misted with condensation from the temperature difference between the warm kitchen and the cold night outside, making it impossible to see through clearly. But as I watched, a shape moved in the darkness beyond, a vague silhouette that seemed to press closer to the glass. A hand appeared, pale against the darkness, and slowly wiped away some of the condensation. Not the whole pane, just a small, vertical strip in the center, as if whoever was out there wanted to peer in with a single eye. I couldn't see a face, just a hand as it dragged downward across the glass, leaving a clear streak through which nothing was visible but the night beyond. The hand itself was wrong somehow. The fingers too long and jointed in too many places. The movements too fluid and precise to seem entirely human. I backed out of the kitchen on shaking legs, retreating to the sitting room. My mind raced through possibilities, each more irrational than the last. A prankster? A stalker? Or something else entirely? Something drawn to my isolated home on this storm-lashed night for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom? Knock, knock, knock. Back at the front door again. How was that possible? I'd been watching the kitchen door the entire time, had seen no movement away from it, unless there was more than one of them. The thought sent ice through my veins. I retreated to the bedroom, the only room with no external doors, and pushed a heavy chest of drawers against the door. It wouldn't stop anyone determined to get in, but it might slow them down. The knocking continued, alternating between front and back doors with maddening regularity. Always the same pattern. 3 measured knocks, a pause, then 3 more, sometimes accompanied by that horrible scraping sound, sometimes by a soft tapping on the windows as I cowered in the bedroom. Hours seemed to pass this way, though my bedside clock told me it was barely 4 a.m. The storm outside had intensified again, rain now hammering against the roof and windows with renewed vigor, the wind rising to a mournful howl that sometimes seemed to carry within it something like words, just on the edge of comprehension. And still the knocking continued, moving from door to door, window to window, as if whatever was out there was testing every possible entrance to my home. I huddled on the bed, a kitchen knife clutched in one hand, my useless phone in the other, desperately trying to get a signal. It was during a brief lull in the storm that I heard it. A new sound from somewhere in the cottage, a soft creak like a door opening, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the wooden floor of the sitting room. Something was inside. I stifled a scream, pressing my hand against my mouth, so hard my teeth cut into my palm. How had it gotten in? I'd checked all the doors and windows before going to bed. They'd been locked, unless I'd missed one, or unless locks meant nothing to whatever was now moving through my home. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. They paused occasionally, as if whatever had entered was examining its surroundings. They grew closer to the bedroom door, then stopped directly outside. I gripped the knife tighter, eyes fixed on the door handle. Would the chest of drawers hold? What would I do if it didn't? Knock, knock, knock on the bedroom door now. The same measured pace, the same deliberate force, as if whatever was out there knew I was inside and was politely requesting entry. What do you want? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, there was a response. A voice came through the door, soft, almost gentle, with an accent I couldn't place and quality to it that made my skin crawl. It was like listening to someone speak through a mouthful of liquid. "Let me in," it said. "It's raining outside. So cold. Let me in. Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "What do you want?" "Just shelter," the voice replied. "Just warmth. Open the door. Look at me." "No," I said, backing away until I hit the wall. "Go away. Leave me alone." A soft chuckle from the other side of the door. A sound like water flowing over stones. But I'm already inside. I just need you to invite me in. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "You're either inside or you aren't." "Inside your home," the voice clarified. "Not inside you. Not yet. Open the door. Look at me." A wave of revulsion washed over me. Whatever was speaking to me, I knew with absolute certainty that I must not open that door, must not look at it. "I'm calling police." I bluffed, knowing my phone still had no signal. Another chuckle, closer now, as if whatever was speaking had pressed itself against the crack between door and frame. No signal in the storm. No help coming. Just you and me. Open the door. Look at me. The door handle turned, pushing against the chest of drawers. The heavy piece of furniture scraped slightly against the floor, but held firm. "For now. Go away," I shouted, desperation making my voice crack. "I don't know what you want, but you can't have it. Leave me alone." "But I'm so thirsty," the voice said, suddenly plaintive. "So empty, and you're so full of life, full of warmth. I just want a little, just a taste. Open the door. Look at me." The pressure on the door increased. The chest of drawers moved another inch. Whatever was pushing clearly possessed strength beyond what its liquid-filled voice suggested. Please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. Please leave me alone. I can't, the voice said, almost sadly. Once invited to the threshold, we must persist until admitted or dawn comes. Those are the rules. Open the door. Look at me. Gone. The word sparked a desperate hope. If I could just hold out until sunrise, perhaps this nightmare would end. I glanced at the clock, 4:47 a.m. October in Northumberland meant sunrise wouldn't be until after 7 a.m. Could I hold out that long? The pressure on the door ebbed suddenly. The handle returned to its original position. For a moment, I dared to hope the thing had given up, had decided to seek easier prey elsewhere. Then came a new sound, the squeak of the bedroom window being pushed upward from outside. I whirled around. The curtains were drawn, but through the gap where they didn't quite meet, I could see the window was indeed opening, inch by inch, rain spattering through the widening gap onto the sill. I'd forgotten the window. In my panic, I'd secured the door but completely overlooked the other entrance to the room. A hand appeared in the gap between the curtains, the same unnaturally long-fingered hand I'd seen on the kitchen door. It grasped the fabric and slowly began to pull the curtain aside. No! I screamed, lunging forward and yanking the curtain closed again. You can't come in. I don't invite you. The hand withdrew, but the voice came again, now from outside the window. That's not how it works. You invited me when you built your home on our path, when you put doors and windows where once we walked freely. Every threshold is an invitation waiting to be accepted. Open the curtain. Look at me. I didn't build this cottage, I argued, desperately trying to keep the curtains closed as the hand returned, tugging with increasing strength. It's been here for over 100 years, and we have been here for thousands, the voice replied. Long before stone was placed upon stone, long before men claimed this land as their own, we remember, we always remember. Open the curtain. Look at me. The tugging on the curtain grew more insistent. The fabric, old and worn, began to tear. Soon there would be nothing between me and whatever waited outside. In desperation, I abandoned my position at the window and ran to the chest of drawers. With strength born of terror, I dragged it away from the door. If I couldn't keep the thing out, my only option was to try to escape. I flung open the bedroom door and ran through the cottage, not daring to look back. The front door was still locked from the inside, the key thankfully still in the lock. I turned it with shaking hands and burst out into the rain-lashed night. The storm had reached its peak. Rain fell in sheets so heavy I could barely see the gravel path leading from my door to the lane beyond. Wind whipped at my dressing gown, immediately soaking me to skin. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I was halfway to the lane when something made me turn back. A movement at the bedroom window caught my eye, the curtain being fully drawn back, and behind the glass, illuminated by a flash of lightning, a figure stood watching me. I couldn't make out details. Thank God. Just an impression of impossible height and thinness, of limbs jointed in too many places, of a head that seemed to flow and change shape even as I watched. In that brief flash of illumination, it raised a hand in what almost seemed like a wave. Then the lightning faded, plunging the scene back into darkness. But I'd seen enough. I ran, barefoot down the muddy lane, not caring about the stones that cut into my feet or the branches that whipped at my face from the hedgerows. I ran until I reached the village, nearly 2 miles away. The local pub had rooms above it, and the landlord, startled by my appearance on his doorstep at 5:30 in the morning, soaking wet and wild-eyed, was kind enough not to ask too many questions. He gave me a room, a towel, and a stiff drink, which I gratefully accepted. I never returned to the cottage. Sent movers to collect my belongings weeks later, in broad daylight. Sold the place without ever setting foot in it again. The estate agent said I was mad to sell such a charming property at such a low price, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be rid of it. The new owners, a young couple from London, seemed delighted with their bargain country retreat. I didn't warn them. What could I say that wouldn't sound utterly deranged? That something ancient and patient and thirsty visited during storms? That it knocked on doors and windows with methodical precision, testing every entrance? That it spoke with a voice like drowning? I've since moved to a flat in Newcastle, surrounded by other homes, other people. No isolation, no silence except that which is created by the white noise of city life. I tell myself I'm safe here, that whatever visited me that night was tied to that particular place, that lonely stretch of countryside with its ancient paths and older memories. But on nights like this, when the rain drums against my windows and the wind howls between the buildings, I sometimes think I hear it. 3 precise, measured knocks on my door in the darkest hours before dawn. Knock, knock, knock. I never answer. I never will. But sometimes I wonder, what would I see if I did? What face would be waiting on the other side of the peephole? And how long can any door or window truly keep out something that has been patiently waiting for an invitation since before my ancestors first drew breath? So I ask you, as you listen to the rain against your window tonight, are you sure that sound is just a storm? Or is something else knocking, testing your thresholds, seeking way in? And if you hear that measured, deliberate pattern in the darkest hours of the night, knock, knock, knock. Whatever you do, don't answer, don't look, and above all, don't invite it in. Have you ever been driving alone at night and you glance in your rear view mirror and just for a split second thought you saw someone sitting in your back seat? That moment when your heart stops, your breath catches, and every nerve in your body screams at you to pull over, to run, to escape the suddenly claustrophobic confines of your own vehicle? I wonder, as the rain patters against your window tonight, if you've ever had that feeling of not being alone when you know full well you should be, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck, as if someone or something is watching you from just behind your shoulder. I've spent the last 5 years trying to forget such a moment, try to convince myself that what happened on that rain-soaked stretch of the A9 between Perth and Inverness was nothing more than an exhaustion-induced hallucination, a trick of light and shadow, combined with the stress of a particularly difficult week. But deep down, I know better. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. It was late November, and I'd been at a conference in Edinburgh for the better part of a week. The plan had been to drive straight home to Inverness on Friday afternoon, but the closing keynote had run long, followed by networking drinks I couldn't politely decline. By the time I extracted myself, it was well past 9 in the evening, and a nasty weather system was moving in from the west. The sensible choice would have been to book a hotel for the night and set off fresh in the morning. But I was desperate to get home, to sleep in my own bed, to see my cat who had been alone with only a neighbor popping in once a day to feed him. So despite the late hour and the deteriorating weather, I decided to make the 3.5-hour drive north. The first leg of the journey was uneventful. Traffic was light on the M90. The rain still merely a drizzle as I passed Perth and joined the A9. I had the radio on, some late-night talk show discussing a recent archaeological discovery in the Highlands, and a large coffee in the cup holder beside me. I was tired but alert enough, confident I could make it home safely. It was around 11 when the weather took a dramatic turn for the worse. What had been a gentle rain suddenly intensified into a proper deluge. Sheets of water cascaded across my windscreen, the wipers struggling to maintain visibility even at their highest setting. The wind picked up too, buffeting my small hatchback and sending waves of standing water across the carriageway. I reduced my speed, leaning forward in my seat to peer through the distorted glass. The road ahead was barely visible, just a vague ribbon of tarmac caught in my headlights before disappearing back into darkness and rain. The few other vehicles that had been ahead of me had either pulled off or moved so far ahead they were out of sight. I was effectively alone on the road. The radio began to crackle with static, the presenter's voice cutting in and out before disappearing altogether. I fiddled with the tuning, but found nothing but white noise across all frequencies. With a sigh, I switched it off, resigning myself to making the rest of the journey in silence. It was in that silence, punctuated only by the drumming of rain on the roof and the rhythmic swish of the wipers, that I first noticed it. A sound that shouldn't have been there. A soft, steady breathing coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, hands tightening on the wheel. I was alone in the car. I knew I was alone. I'd driven straight from the conference center, stopping only once for petrol and coffee at a service station outside Edinburgh. No one could possibly be in the car with me, and yet that breathing continued, soft but distinct. In, out, in, out. The sound of someone trying to remain quiet, but unable to completely silence the fundamental function of their lungs. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, despite the chill in the air. I wanted to look in the rear view mirror, but found myself terrified of what I might see reflected there. Instead, I reached over and turned the heating up full blast, hoping the added noise would drown out the breathing. It didn't. If anything, the sound seemed to grow louder, more defined. And now there was something else, a faint scent permeating the car's interior. Something damp and earthy, like wet soil mixed with decaying vegetation. The smell you might associate with a recently dug grave. I couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted the rear view mirror and looked. The back seat was empty. Relief washed over me, followed almost immediately by self-recrimination. Of course no one was there. I was letting the late hour of the storm and my own exhaustion play tricks on me. The breathing was probably just the sound of air moving through the car's ventilation system. The smell, perhaps something I tracked in on my shoes from the conference center gardens. I refocused on the road ahead, determined to maintain concentration for the remainder of the journey. But the breathing continued, and now it seemed to have moved. Not from the back seat anymore, but from directly behind me, as if someone was leaning forward, their mouth inches from the back of my neck. "Stop it," I said aloud, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in confined space. "There's no one there. You're imagining things. Are you sure about that?" The voice, a woman's, low and slightly raspy, with an accent I couldn't quite place, came from the passenger seat beside me. I jerked my head to the right, the car swerving slightly before I corrected it. The passenger seat appeared empty, but something was wrong with the way the shadows fell across it. They seemed too deep, too solid, as if the darkness itself had somehow gained substance. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice embarrassingly high and tight with fear. "What do you want?" A soft laugh answered me, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Just a little company," the voice replied. "It's a long drive on a night like this. Dangerous to be alone." As if on cue, a powerful gust of wind hit the car, pushing it toward the edge of the road. I wrestled with the steering wheel, bringing the vehicle back into the center of the lane. "You're not real," I said firmly, directing my words to the apparently empty passenger seat. "You're a hallucination brought on by exhaustion." I'm going to pull over at the next services and get some rest. Oh, I wouldn't stop if I were you, the voice cautioned. Not on a night like this. Not on this stretch of road. There was a pause, then, don't you know what happened here? Despite myself, I felt a prickle of curiosity beneath the fear. What do you mean? What happened where? The shadows in the passenger seat shifted, coalescing into something more defined. Still not quite a human form, but the suggestion of one, a darker silhouette against the general darkness. This section of road, the voice explained, it was rerouted about 30 years ago, straightened out to eliminate a dangerous curve. But the old road is still there, just beyond those trees to your left. And that's where it happened. Where I happened, I resisted the urge to look left, to peer through the rain-lashed darkness at whatever might lie beyond the tree lean. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, trying to keep my voice even. And I don't care. You're not real. December 3rd, 1989, the voice continued as if I hadn't spoken. A night very much like this one. Pouring rain, howling wind. I was trying to get home, just like you, driving too fast with conditions, taking that curve too wide. The shadow figure seemed to lean toward me. Do you want to know what it feels like? When metal crumples around you, when glass shatters against your skin, when the steering column punches through your chest. Stop it. I whispered, a wave of nausea washing over me. Just stop. I didn't die right away, she continued relentlessly. Lay there for hours, bleeding out slowly, calling for help that never came. The rain washing into the broken windscreen, mixing with my blood. By the time they found me the next morning, I'd been dead for hours. I was shaking now, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. Ghosts weren't real. This was just an elaborate hallucination. My exhausted brain conjuring up one of those tragic news stories you hear about on late-night radio programs. What do you want from me? I finally asked, deciding to engage with the delusion, to let it play out rather than fight it. The shadow figure shifted again, becoming more distinct. I could now make out the vague outline of a woman's profile. A nose, a chin, the curve of a neck, all formed from deeper shadows within the general darkness. Company, she repeated. It gets lonely haunting this stretch of road. Most drivers don't notice me. Or if they do, they explain me away, just as you try to do. I felt rather than saw her turn toward me. But you're different. You can hear me clearly. See me, or at least sense me. You're receptive. Lucky me, I muttered, fear giving way to a strange, almost hysterical humor. Receptive to hallucinations. Not a hallucination, she corrected gently. A visitation. There's a difference. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. Still a good hour and a half from Inverness. Assuming the weather didn't worsen. An eternity in which to be trapped in a car with whatever this was. So you're what exactly? I asked, deciding that keeping her talking was better than sitting in terrified silence. A ghost? A spirit? Some kind of road-specific phantom. All of those. None of those. I could hear the shrug in her voice. Labels don't really matter when you're dead. I am what remained when everything else is gone. Memories, emotions, unfinished business. And your unfinished business involves terrifying random drivers on the A9? She laughed again. That same sound that seemed to surround me rather than come from a specific point. Not terrifying. Warning, sometimes. Guiding, occasionally. Mostly just connecting. Reminding myself of what it was to be alive, to interact, to be seen and heard. Despite my fear, I felt a stab of sympathy. The loneliness in her voice was palpable, a profound isolation that transcended the normal human experience. To be trapped in one place, unseen and unheard by almost everyone for decades. It must be difficult, I said softly, being stuck here all this time. It is, she agreed, a note of surprise in her voice, as if she hadn't expected understanding. Time passes differently for me now. Most days are what you would call days. I'm only vaguely aware, more like a dream state. But then there are nights like this, when the conditions are right, the right kind of storm, the right kind of darkness, and I become more present. As she spoke, the shadow in the passenger seat continued to gain definition. I could now make out the distinct shape of a woman sitting there, still formed of darkness rather than solid matter, but unmistakably human in form. She appeared to be wearing what might have been a jacket or coat, her hair loose around her shoulders. And what happens on these nights when you become more present? I asked, fighting to keep my voice casual despite the surreal conversation. There was a long pause before she answered. When she did, her voice had changed subtly, an underlying tone that sent a fresh chill down my spine. Different things, she said. Sometimes I just watch, remember what it was like to be flesh and blood, to feel the pulse of life. Sometimes I try to help. Warn drivers when they're approaching a dangerous patch of road, or when they're drifting off to sleep. She leaned closer, and I felt a cold pressure against my arm, as if someone had pressed an ice cube against my skin through my jacket. And sometimes, when I find someone particularly receptive, I go a little further. I jerked away from the cold touch, the car swerving again before I brought it back under control. What does that mean? I demanded, fear sharpening my voice. What do you mean? Further? I can show you, she whispered, now so close I could feel her cold breath against my ear. I can show you what it was like. My last moments. The fear, the pain, the slow fade into darkness. Would you like that? To know what death feels like? No, I said firmly, pressing myself against the driver's side door, as far from the shadow figure as the confines of the car would allow. No, I absolutely would not like that. Are you sure? She persisted. It's quite an experience. Transformative, you might say, and it would help me. Sharing the memory makes it less overwhelming, spreads the weight of it, like carrying a heavy load with two people instead of one. Find someone else to share with, I said, trying to sound resolute despite the tremor in my voice. I'm not interested. The shadow woman sighed, a sound like wind through bare branches. That's what they all say at first. But in the end, most of them change their minds. Especially on a night like this, when the boundary between life and death is as thin as rice paper. As if emphasizing her point, lightning flashed overhead, momentarily illuminating the car's interior with harsh white light. In that brief moment of brightness, I caught a glimpse of my passenger. Not a shadow anymore, but a woman with pale skin and dark, with hair plastered to her skull. Her face was a ruin of cuts and bruises. Her clothes soaked with what could only be blood. Her chest a concave mess where the steering column had impaled her. I cried out, instinctively closing my eyes against the horrific image. When I opened them again, darkness had returned, and with it, the more tolerable shadow version of my unwanted passenger. Sorry about that, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Sometimes I forget how I appear to the living. It's been so long since I've seen my own reflection. My heart was racing, my breathing shallow and rapid. I was verging on a panic attack, trapped in a car with something that shouldn't exist, something that had just shown me a glimpse of its true, nightmare-inducing form. Please leave, I whispered, beyond pride now, reduced to simple begging. Just go. I don't want you here. I know, she said, and there was genuine regret in her voice. No one ever does. But I'm so tired of being alone, of being forgotten. Do you know, they never even put up a memorial? No cross by the roadside. No flowers on anniversary. It's like I never existed at all. The rain intensified, if that was possible, now lashing against the car with what felt like deliberate malice. The road ahead had become a dark river, difficult to distinguish from the actual waterways we occasionally crossed. I'd reduced my speed to a crawl, both out of necessity and a desperate desire to prolong the journey, to delay whatever my passenger had planned for me. "What was your name?" I asked suddenly, the question surprising even me. "When you were alive, The shadow beside me seemed to still, as if my question had caught her off guard. "Marion," she finally said. "Marion Campbell. I was 27 when I died. A primary school teacher from Dundee. A real name, a real age, a real profession, and hometown. Details that made her more than just a frightening apparition. That reminded me she had once been a person with a life and dreams and people who cared about her. I'm sorry about what happened to you, Marion." I said, meaning it. "It sounds like a horrible way to die. And I'm sorry no one put up a memorial, that there's nothing to mark where you pass." The cold pressure returned to my arm, but it was different now. Less threatening, more like the tentative touch of someone seeking connection. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's been a very long time since anyone has spoken my name." We drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the rain against the roof and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers. The shadow beside me remained, but the oppressive sense of menace had diminished somewhat, replaced by something closer to melancholy. "I'm not going to show you my death," she finally said. "Not tonight, anyway. You've been kind, kinder than most, and you're right to be afraid. It's not a pleasant experience to share." Relief washed over me, so intense it left me lightheaded. "Thank you. I managed, but I would ask something else of you," she continued. "Something simpler." I hesitated, wary of making promises to whatever Marion now was. "What is it?" "Remember me," she said simply. "When you pass this way again, think of me, say my name, if only in your thoughts. It helps somehow, makes me feel less erased." It was such a small request, so human in its simplicity, to be remembered, to have existed in someone's mind. If no longer in the physical world, I promise. Every time I drive this stretch of road, I'll remember you, Marion. The shadow beside me seemed to nod, a slight movement in the darkness. "Then our encounter hasn't been entirely without purpose," she said. "And now, I think it's time for me to go. You're approaching the end of my territory, so to speak." I glanced at the road signs illuminated in my headlights. Pitlochry, just a few miles ahead. Beyond that, the A9 continued north through increasingly mountainous terrain toward Inverness. "Will you be all right?" I asked, then immediately felt foolish. What a thing to ask a ghost who had been dead for decades. But Marion seemed to take the question seriously. "As all right as I can be," she replied. "Some nights are harder than others. Anniversaries, birthdays, the date of my death. But most of the time, it's like I said, a dream state. Not unpleasant, just waiting. Waiting for what?" She was silent for so long, I thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice had taken on that distant quality again, as if she was already beginning to fade. "I don't know," she admitted. "Perhaps for someone to remember me. Perhaps for whatever comes next, if anything does." The shadow in the passenger seat was definitely less distinct now, breaking apart the edges like smoke in a breeze. "Goodbye," Marion said, her voice now a little more than a whisper. "Drive safely. And remember your promise." "I will," I assured her. "Goodbye, Marion." And then she was gone. No dramatic disappearance. No theatrical fading away. Just an empty passenger seat where the shadow woman had been. The only evidence of her presence, a lingering trace of that earthy, grave-like scent. I drove the rest of the way to Inverness in a state of numb disbelief. The reality of what happened or what I thought had happened. Impossible to fully process. By the time I reached my flat, exhaustion had overwhelmed everything else. I fell into bed fully clothed and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke, in the rational light of day, I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream, or perhaps a stress-induced hallucination, a combination of exhaustion, poor visibility, and too many late-night ghost stories heard around campfires in my youth. But I couldn't quite make myself believe it. The memory was too vivid, too detailed. The cold touch on my arm, the smell of damp earth, the lightning-illuminated glimpse of Marion's true appearance, horrific in its brutal reality. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I began researching traffic fatalities on the A9, specifically around the Pitlari area in December 1989. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a small news item in the archives of the Courier, a Dundee newspaper. Local teacher killed in A9 crash. Marion Campbell, 27, a primary school teacher from Dundee, was killed instantly when her car left the road on a dangerous curve near Pitlari during severe weather conditions. Ms. Campbell, who taught at Blackness Primary School, was described by colleagues as dedicated and much loved by her pupils. Police attribute the accident to excessive speed and weather conditions. The article was accompanied by a small photograph. A young woman with dark hair and a warm smile, nothing like the ruined face I glimpsed in the lightning flash. But it was her, Marion Campbell, the passenger who had shared my car on that rain-soaked night. The article mentioned nothing about her not being found until morning. Nothing about her dying slowly, alone in the wreckage. Perhaps that part had been Marion's personal nightmare, her subjective experience of death rather than the official record. Or perhaps the newspaper had sanitized the truth, sparing her family the knowledge of her suffering. I've driven that stretch of the A9 many times since that night, and each time, as promised, I think of Marion. Sometimes I even speak her name aloud, a quiet acknowledgement of a life cut short and a death unwitnessed. She's never appeared to me again, at least not in the way she did that first night. But occasionally, when the conditions are right, heavy rain, late hour, that particular stretch of road, I'll catch a whiff of that earthy scent, or feel a momentary chill against my arm where she once touched me. And I wonder, as you listen to the rain against your window tonight, whether Marion is the only one of her kind. How many others might there be, trapped at the sites of their deaths, yearning for connection, for recognition, for the simple acknowledgement that they once existed? How many lonely spirits might be out there on rain-soaked roads, looking for receptive passengers to share their stories? So the next time you're driving alone at night, and you glance in your rear-view mirror to find a shadow where no shadow should be, or feel a presence in the seat beside you when you know you set off alone, perhaps, instead of fear, you might offer understanding, a moment of connection across the divide between the living and the dead. But then again, perhaps not, because not all of those who linger are as benevolent as Marion. Some have darker purposes, deeper hungers, and not all of them are content merely to be remembered. Sleep well, and drive safely on rainy nights. Have you ever taken a shortcut through the woods and found yourself temporarily disoriented, unsure which path leads home? That moment when familiar surroundings suddenly seem alien, when the trees close in around you, and you can't quite remember if you should turn left or right at the fork ahead. It's a peculiar feeling, isn't it? That flutter of panic, quickly suppressed by rationality. You're not really lost, just momentarily confused. I wonder, as the rain patters softly against your window tonight, if you've ever considered how thin the line is between being slightly turned around and being truly, irrevocably lost. How easily one can cross from one state to the other, often without even realizing it until it's too late. I crossed that line 5 years ago on a rainy September evening much like this one. And what I found on the other side has haunted me ever since. I'd been visiting my mother in the small village of Embers Field where I'd grown up, a picturesque cluster of stone cottages nestled in a valley in the Yorkshire Dales. It had been a pleasant weekend, catching up, helping with some minor repairs around her cottage, walking the familiar hills that surrounded the village. I'd been living in London for nearly a decade by then, and these periodic returns to my childhood home served as a welcome respite from the city's relentless pace. On that Sunday evening, I set out to walk back to the train station in the neighboring town of Millfield, about 4 miles away. Though Mom offered to drive me, I declined, preferring to stretch my legs one last time before returning to cramped confines of urban life. The weather forecast had mentioned the possibility of rain later, but the sky was merely overcast when I set off, a duffel bag slung over my shoulder containing my weekend belongings. There were 2 routes from Embers Field to Millfield, the main road, which wound around the base of Blackwood Hill, adding about a mile to the journey, or the path through Blackwood itself, steeper but more direct, emerging just at the edge of Millfield. I'd walked both countless times in my youth and knew them intimately, or so I thought. I chose a woodland path, partly for nostalgia's sake and partly because the threatened rain was beginning to materialize, a fine drizzle that would likely intensify as the evening progressed. The trees would provide some shelter, and the shorter route meant less time exposed to the elements. Blackwood had been my playground as a child, a sprawling, ancient woodland that cloaked the hills separating the 2 settlements. Every trail, every clearing, every distinctive tree had featured in my youthful adventures. The main path was wide and well-trodden, impossible to miss even as daylight began to fade. I'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes, the rain now falling more steadily through the canopy above. When I came to a fork in the path I didn't immediately recognize. The left branch was clearly the main trail, continuing its gentle ascent toward the crest of the hill. But the right fork, narrower and less distinct, seemed somehow compelling. It angled more directly toward where I knew Millfield lay on the other side of the hill. A shortcut, I thought, one I'd perhaps known as a boy, but had forgotten over the years of absence. Without much consideration, I took the right fork, adjusting the hood of my jacket as the rain continued to intensify. The path narrowed further as I proceeded, the trees growing closer together, their branches forming a denser canopy overhead. Despite the deteriorating weather, I felt a pleasurable sense of reconnection with my childhood environment. The earthy scent of the woodland floor, the particular quality of light filtered through multiple layers of leaves, the squelch of mud beneath my boots. These sensations occupied me so completely that it took some time to register the growing strangeness of my surroundings. The path, which had been climbing steadily toward the hill's crest, had begun to level out and even descend slightly. The trees, which had been mainly oak and ash with the occasional beech, were now predominantly conifers, tall, straight pines with dense, dark needles that admitted even less light. I paused, looking back the way I'd come. The path behind me seemed different somehow, narrower, less distinct, as if already being reclaimed by the woodland. A flutter of unease passed through me. Had I somehow strayed from the trail without noticing? I reached for my phone, intending to check my location on its map application, only to find no signal. Not unusual in these remote dales, especially within dense woodland. I considered turning back, but calculated that I must be more than halfway to Millfield by now. Better to press on than retrace my steps. The rain was falling heavily now, drumming against my jacket hood, transforming the path ahead into a small stream of muddy water. The daylight was fading rapidly, the dense canopy above accelerating the onset of darkness. I quickened my pace, eager to emerge from the increasingly unfamiliar woodland before night fell completely. After another 15 minutes of walking, with no sign of the path cresting the hill or beginning its descent toward Millfield, I was forced to admit I had somehow gone astray. The woodland around me bore little resemblance to the Blackwood I remembered. The trees were too dense, too uniform in their somber appearance. The undergrowth too sparse, as if little could flourish in perpetual gloom beneath the pine canopy. I stopped again, turning in a full circle, seeking any landmark that might orient me. In the gathering darkness, the trees all looked identical, tall, straight trunks disappearing upward into dense branches that blocked out the sky almost entirely. The path itself was now barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest floor, just a slightly less overgrown strip winding between the trees. For the first time, I felt a genuine stab of fear, not the mild concern of being temporarily turned around, but the deep, primal fear of being truly lost as darkness fell. I reached for my phone again, this time activating its torch function. The beam seemed feeble in the engulfing darkness of the forest, illuminating only a small patch of ground and the nearest tree trunks, which loomed like silent sentinels in the artificial light. I needed to make a decision, continue forward, hoping the path would eventually lead somewhere recognizable, or attempt to retrace my steps. Following the increasingly indistinct trail back to the fork where I'd gone wrong, I decided to press on. The train wasn't due until 9:30 p.m. I still had nearly 2 hours. The path had to lead somewhere. Blackwood wasn't vast enough for me to become irrevocably lost as long as I kept moving in one direction. The rain grew heavier still, finding its way through the canopy and the inadequate protection of my jacket. I was soon wet through, my clothes clinging uncomfortably to my skin, my boots squelching with each step. The temperature seemed to be dropping as well, the September evening taking on an unseasonable chill that penetrated to my bones. It was fully dark now, my world reduced to the small circle of illumination provided by my phone's torch. Outside that circle, the forest was a wall of impenetrable shadow, occasionally broken by the gleam of raindrops catching the light as they fell through the beam. I'd been walking for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted it had been only 40 minutes since I'd taken the unfamiliar fork. The path continued its apparently endless meandering through the identical trees, neither ascending nor descending in any significant way, but simply leading me deeper into the increasingly alien woodland. It was then that I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the natural chorus of the forest at night. Not the patter of rain, not the occasional rustle of some small creature in the undergrowth. This was rhythmic, deliberate, footsteps, someone or something walking through the woods nearby, paralleling my own path. I stopped, switching off my torch instinctively, though I couldn't have explained why. In the sudden darkness, my other senses seemed to sharpen. The footsteps continued for a moment before also halting. They had been keeping pace with me. I realized, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the dense air. "Is someone there?" No verbal response came, but after a moment, the footsteps resumed. Closer now, moving directly toward my position rather than paralleling it. I switched my torch back on, sweeping the beam in the direction of the sound. For a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of movement between the trees. A pale shape, roughly human in form but too quick to properly identify before it passed behind a thick trunk. "Hello." I tried again, louder this time. "I'm a bit lost. Can you help me find a way to Millfield?" The footsteps stopped again. There was a pause, a moment of complete silence save for the rain. Then, softly but distinctly, a voice spoke from behind the tree where I'd seen the movement. "Are you sure Millfield is where you want to go?" The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It had an oddly hollow quality, as if coming from the bottom of a well, but it was unquestionably human, or at least human-like. "Yes," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm trying to catch the train back to London." A soft sound followed my response, something between a sigh and a laugh. London. The voice repeated as if testing the word. So far away, so many people, so much noise and light. Something in the way it said this, with a mixture of longing and distaste, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Do you live near here? I asked, still unable to see who or what I was speaking to. I live here, the voice replied simply. In the woods. Always have. Could you please show yourself? I requested, torch beams still fixed on the tree behind which they were hiding. It's difficult to talk to someone I can't see. Another of those strange, sighing laughs. Are you sure that's what you want? People often think they want to see, until they do. Then they wish they could unsee. My mouth went dry. Every instinct was now screaming at me to turn and run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever lurked behind that tree. But I was hopelessly lost in complete darkness, in a woodland that seemed to grow more unfamiliar with every step. Running blindly would only worsen my situation. I'd still like to see who I'm talking to, I insisted, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. After a long pause, the voice replied, Very well, but remember, you asked. Slowly, a figure emerged from behind a tree into the beam of my torch. At first glance, it appeared to be a person, humanoid in shape of average height, standing upright on two legs. But as more of it came into view, the wrongness of it became apparent. Its proportions were subtly off, arms too long, neck too thin, fingers that seemed to have too many joints. It wore what might have been clothing once, tattered remnants that hung from its frame like moss from a branch. But it was the face that caused me to take an involuntary step backward, nearly dropping my phone in shock. Where a human face should have been was instead a pale, smooth expanse of skin, interrupted only by what appeared to be a vertical slit where the mouth should be. No eyes, no nose, no other features to make it recognizably human. Yet somehow, despite this lack, I had the distinct impression it was looking directly at me, seeing me far more clearly than I could see it. What are you? I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. The vertical slit widened slightly, revealing darkness within. I am what becomes of those who stray from the path, it said, that hollow voice now identifiably coming from the opening in its face. Those who take the wrong turn, those who cannot find their way home. I was backing away now, unable to tear my eyes from the thing before me. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely audible even in my own ears. Don't you? It replied, taking a step toward me, maintaining the distance between us. You felt it already, how this place is different, how time moves differently here, how the paths change, the trees shift, the darkness deepens. This isn't your Blackwood anymore. Perhaps it never was. My back hit something solid, a tree trunk. I was cornered now, the creature still advancing slowly. What do you want from me? I demanded, fear making my voice crack. It stopped, head tilting to one side at an angle no human neck could achieve. Company, it said simply. It gets lonely here in the space between. I was like you once. Took a wrong turn. Tried to find a shortcut home. Wandered too long in the dark. It gestured vaguely at its own form. This is what happens when you remain too long. You begin to forget what you looked like, who you were, why you were trying to get home at all. A chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran down my spine. I need to go, I said firmly. I need to find my way back to the main path. There is no main path, the creature replied, a note of what might have been sadness in its hollow voice. Not anymore. Not for you. You stepped off it when you chose a fork. Now there's only forward, deeper in, or staying here with me until you become like me. I refuse to accept this. There has to be a way out. Blackwood isn't that large. If I keep walking in one direction, I'll eventually reach its edge. The vertical slit widened again in what I realized was its version of a smile. Perhaps, if this were Blackwood, but you left that behind when you chose a fork. This place has many names, in many languages, across many times. Some call it the Between, others the Crooked Forest, the Lost Woods, the place where the missing go. I don't believe you, I said, but without conviction, because some part of me recognized the truth in its words, had felt the wrongness of this place from the moment I had taken that narrow right-hand path. Belief is irrelevant, it replied with that horrible not-quite smile. Reality is what it is, regardless of whether you accept it. It drew closer, close enough now that I could smell it, a damp, earthy scent, like mushrooms growing on rotting wood. But there are ways to leave if one knows how. Ways I remember sometimes when forgetting isn't too thick. Hope flared briefly. You know the way out? You could show me. I could, it agreed, for a price. Of course there would be a price. There always is in stories like this. And I was becoming increasingly certain I had stumbled into what was essentially a dark fairy tale made real. What price? I asked cautiously, the creature's head tilted again, considering me. A memory? It finally said, one of yours. Something precious. Something that keeps you connected to who you are. Give me that, and I'll show you the path that leads back to your world. How would I give you a memory? I asked, torn between desperate hope and deep suspicion. Like this, it said, and suddenly it was much closer, one of those too long, two-jointed hands reaching toward my face. Before I could react, cold fingers pressed against my forehead. The world seemed to shudder around me. Images flashed behind my eyes. My life, my memories, flickering past at impossible speed. The creature was rifling through them like pages in a book, searching for something particular. It stopped abruptly on a summer day when I was 10 years old. My father, still alive then, teaching me to fish in the small river that ran near Embers Field. The sun warm on my back, the cool water around my wellies, his patient voice explaining how to cast a line just so. One of my last perfect days with him before the illness that would take him 2 years later. This one, the creature said, its hollow voice somehow inside my head now. A good memory, strong, full of love and light. No, I protested, trying to pull away. Not that one. Please. The brighter the memory, the clearer the path becomes, it explained, almost apologetically. Dark memories cast no light, cast no shadows to follow. I felt it then, a tugging sensation, as if the memory was being gently pulled from my mind, not erased completely, but faded, diminished, the details becoming fuzzy, the emotions attached to it dampened. When the creature finally withdrew its hand, I sagged against a tree, suddenly exhausted. The memory of that day with my father was still there, but altered, like a photograph that's been left in the sun too long. The colors bleached out, the image indistinct. It is done, the creature said, withdrawing slightly. It seemed somehow more substantial now, its featureless face slightly more defined, as if my memory had nourished it in some fundamental way. Now I will show you the path, as promised. It turned and began walking deeper into the forest, clearly expecting me to follow. Despite my misgivings, I did so, having no better option. We walked in silence for what felt like a long time, the rain continuing to fall around us, though it seemed to avoid the creature, droplets curving away from its form as if repelled. Finally, it stopped at what appeared to be a solid wall of vegetation, a tangle of brambles, ferns, and low-hanging branches that formed an impenetrable barrier. Here, it said, gesturing toward the greenery, this is a threshold. I stared at the wall of plants skeptically. There's no path there, There is if you know how to see it, the creature replied. It reached out again, but this time toward the vegetation. At its touch, the plants seemed to withdraw, curling back on themselves, revealing a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. Beyond was darkness, but a different quality of darkness in the forest around us. Less oppressive, more open somehow. Step through, the creature instructed. Keep walking straight ahead. Do not look back. Do not deviate from the path, no matter what you hear or see at the corners of your vision. If you do this, you will emerge near Millfield, though perhaps not exactly where you expect. I approach the opening cautiously, and if I don't follow those instructions, if I look back or stray from the path, that terrible not smile again, then you'll find yourself back here with me, and next time, the price for leaving will be higher, a more precious memory, a brighter light. I nodded, understanding the implicit threat. Thank you, I said, the words feeling strange in this context, but necessary nonetheless, for showing me the way. The creature inclined its head slightly. Remember this, when you return to your world of noise and light and movement, it said, the wrong path can look very much like the right one, and some shortcuts lead to very long journeys indeed. With those cryptic words echoing in my mind, I stepped through the opening in the vegetation, feeling a strange resistance as I passed through, as if moving through a membrane rather than air. The creature was right. There was a path here, barely visible in the gloom, but definitely present, winding away into darkness. I followed it carefully, mindful of the warnings I'd been given. Several times I thought I heard movements to either side of me, caught glimpses of pale shapes flitting between distant trees, heard whispers in languages I didn't recognize. Each time, I forced myself to look straight ahead, to focus only on the path beneath my feet. Eventually, the trees began to thin, the darkness to recede. The rain was still falling, but it was a normal September rain now, not the otherworldly downpour between. And ahead, glowing to the thinning trees, were lights, the street lamps of Millfield. I emerged from the woodland at the edge of the town, but not at the usual exit point of the main path. Instead, I found myself behind the old cemetery, at least half a mile from the train station. Checking my watch, I was stunned to see it was 9:20 p.m., just 10 minutes before my train was due to depart. I ran, arriving at the platform breathless, but immensely relieved to be back in the world of timetables and ticket barriers and other human beings. I boarded the train without looking back at the dark line of trees visible from the station. It was only during the journey back to London, as I sat in the warm, brightly lit carriage watching raindrops streak the windows, that I fully processed what had happened. I told myself it had been a hallucination brought on by getting lost in the familiar woodland as darkness fell. The creature, the bargain, the altered memory, all products of an overactive imagination combined with panic and exhaustion. But I knew deep down that it had been real, and the proof was in that memory of fishing with my father, still present in my mind but fundamentally changed. The emotional resonance diminished, the details blurred at the edges. A photograph left too long in the sun. I returned to Embersfield many times since then to visit my mother. I've even walked to Millfield again, but always by the road, never through Blackwood. Sometimes, standing at the edge of the trees, I think I can see a narrow path winding away between the oaks and ashes, inviting me to take a shortcut. I always refuse, because I know now what lurks in the spaces between familiar places, in the gaps between well-trodden paths. I know the price of straying, of seeking easier routes, and I know that somewhere in that other forest, the one that exists alongside our own but is fundamentally different, there walks a creature with my father's laugh, my father's voice, my father's hand on my shoulder as he teaches me to cast a fishing line into sunlit water. So I ask you, as the rain continues to fall outside your window tonight. Are you certain of the path that leads you home? And if you were offered a shortcut through the gathering darkness, would you take it? Remember, not all who wander are lost, but some who take the wrong turning never find their way back at all. Sleep well and stick to the main path, won't you?